the absolute pick. I was walking around the airport in Sydney and I saw a guy walk past the other day with an Aphex cap on, and he
No
looked great.
way. No, you didn't. Did you see yourself in the mirror? There's
Oh my
no way
god!
someone was wearing the Aphex cap.
No, someone when you ship about 7,000 of them, someone's eventually going to show up wearing them.
You're listening to the Offsite podcast with Jason and Carlos, where we talk all things construction and technology.
Join us for discussions with industry leaders and insights into the latest trends in construction.
Welcome back to the pod. So first up, I'm going to introduce a brand new co-host for the Offsite podcast. Carlos is taking a couple of weeks off because he is becoming a new dad. So congratulations to Carlos, although slightly in advance when we're recording this. Carlos is going to be off for a couple of episodes while he gets used to never sleeping again, I think, for the rest of his life. In his stead, I'm going to be joined by Mike York, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Aphex and is going to definitely swing the balance of Oz UK co-host to 100% Australian co-host of pod. Mike, welcome, mate.
Thanks, Jace. Good to be here. Very big shoes to fill for Carlos, but having a couple of young kids myself, I feel like, I've come in with the right bid to fill the shoes for a couple of apps.
Awesome, mate. Thank you very much for joining. And I thought we'd start with like what would be a somewhat easy episode. The goal was to get a really friendly customer of Aphex to talk about construction software and how great Aphex is, and use that as a nice warm up for your first one as a co-host. But I unfortunately couldn't get anyone nice to say anything nice. So I thought instead we'd bring on an employee. So Sam. So our guest today is Sam Hanisch. So Sam is an account exec at Aphex. He has recently joined the team after many years, like myself, in construction as an engineer and a construction manager. Sam, thank you very much for getting up early and joining us today, mate. How are you?
Yeah, good. No problem. Happy to be here. I thought when you were doing that intro about a customer, I was like, shit, am I doing a profile here or something, like pretending to be a customer? So moment of panic's over. That's good.
No, it's good to know that you would be happy to pretend to be a customer just based on that intro if needed.
As you said, employee, I just I do what's needed. So
yeah, okay, cool. Mate, I guess would be super interesting just for some context to just start with, like, you're at a large contractor here in Oz, or a couple over many years. By all reports from people I've spoken to that worked with you, were really good at your job. And I'd imagine as a result of that, you're paid pretty well in construction. I guess the ultimate question is, for context, what made you make the switch?
Yeah, probably a few things. I think most engineers or most people in construction can remember a point where they're tossing up whether to maybe do a bit of a career shift. And it's probably most people in most career paths. I've been sort of 12, 13 years in the same stream, going like engineer on site, doing project to project, moving up, from engineer towards project management space. So pretty standard engineer profile. And yeah, I'm in my early 30s and I'd really been looking for some sort of different opportunity. And the thing with it is there's sort of two things. There's always the fear that you move into something completely different and you've got to start again. So it's really hard, and that's probably why people don't make the shift. So when this opportunity sort of came up and we had a demo and I really loved the product, it was I could see a path where I could make that transition, but I still had all this experience that I could bring into this role. So that was part of it. And I guess, like you said on the money, it's a bit of they call it the golden handcuffs. I'm sure you've heard that expression, but that's the feeling a lot of engineers get as they're moving up into higher ranks. They're not necessarily so happy, but the pay's good. It's actually, it's a great job. You get a lot of, new projects. It's very diverse. So it's hard to pass it up. But yeah, no kids at this stage, so I'm
Yeah.
quite free. I'm quite free to make these sort of somewhat risky jumps.
I got this. It would have been last year sometime, and one of our teams sent me a message saying someone's just written into our like support email or chat function, and they sent me
Yeah.
through this message that was like this super well written, funny, honest. I guess that context that you just gave, basically written in a message, and yeah, this person can communicate super well, is willing to take that risk, and may I thank you massively for doing it, because you're doing a great job. And
Oh, cheers.
now you're on a podcast.
Thanks for responding. Yeah, thanks for responding. I was like, there's no way he's going to write back to this. Going to be, who's this weirdo sending in emails like that?
No,
The first of many outreaches with successful responses, mate.
I guess you can see from the first few emails I've been doing at Aphex that I probably spent a good hour or two writing that email to send to you.
Mate, the reason I wanted to have you join this conversation is that very few people have like sat on both sides of the table. It's something that I've experienced, and a couple of the team here have. But yeah, that experience of being both the in construction kind of the target of, you know, software and technology vendors, and then like jumping over, I thought it'd be a really unique timing and opportunity to talk about exploring that concept from both sides. And I guess on our side, being the like, let's say now that you're on our side of the software vendor side, I guess we kind of have this expectation that construction folks, engineers, project managers, planners, whatever the role is, are kind of just bombarded with ads for technology. They're getting spammed with outbound emails all the time. They walk around an event, they're getting like crash tackled and mobbed. What's your view on like that expectation versus reality of like what it actually feels like to be, let's say, the target of the software and technology that's everywhere?
To be honest, I never had that experience where I felt like I was getting swamped by tech sales or tech products, like the usual sales pitches I'm getting it from like Coates Hire, or a lot of hire companies, or mum and dad plant operators that are trying to get on your site. The actual tech approach wasn't very often, and I wonder whether that's because I wasn't going to those sorts of conferences, and maybe those sort of targets are sitting up in corporate, because I'm sure they're getting hit. But from my perspective, it wasn't. I was never really getting bombarded. Most of the new tech that we tried to proceed with was either stuff we found, or it was stuff that came from corporate.
Okay, it's good to know. So, Mike, that means we can really ramp up the ad velocity.
I just heard it's open season. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. I worked for a lot of sort of tier 2 companies, so I imagine it's a different story for the guys and girls sitting in the tier 1 shoes. With those email extensions, they're probably getting a few more hits.
So, what's your perception if you just lump in like all sales approaches then that you were getting bombarded with? I won't shout out Coates Hire again, but for all those vendors that are trying to like get onto your project, what's the perception from you in construction when you're getting like that heavy outbound versus maybe seeing them more passively when you've got like emails landing in your inbox or wherever else they're getting to you? Yeah, what's your perception of like those outbound approaches?
I think everyone's a human that's sitting there on these projects, and we're all very busy. It's pretty easy to sniff just a generic bulk sent out email. So generally, like if you're getting something, you can see someone who's written an email, or it's a bit more personable, and there's not like infographics from their catalog on there, that you're more likely to take a second to read it. And to be honest, it's quite few and far between. Often, as I imagine, these companies are trying to get very broad coverage, that they're sort of getting a first name email and then just a bulk dump out to any engineer or supervisor they can hit in these orgs. So they were usually ones that would get a response, but yeah, few and far between from what I can remember.
So either they weren't targeting you in particular. You must have like got off the old subscribe list, or the like company spam filtering system must have been working overtime or something there.
Actually, I do now. I remember there was this one guy, and he's probably the best sales guy, or the most dedicated like construction sales guy I ever saw. So he was selling. I won't, obviously name the company, but
Is it
he
Coates Hire
would.
again?
So yeah, no, not Coates Hire. Bought a few things off him in WA for a project, and then this guy would call me every week for about 4 years. He would check in with me every single week to see what I was doing, to the point that obviously after 5, 6 weeks, you're like, it's this guy again. You've got do not answer saved in your contacts. This guy changed his number like 3 times through the process. So he'd gone through a year and be like, oh, I'm not getting hits. I need to change my number again. And then they just restart it. And I was almost impressed. I was like, you know what, good on you. Like you're going that extra yard. But he's definitely on the far scale of spamming your customers.
Okay, right. So the when you say best sales, you mean like most energetic or
Yes.
most
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, cool. Mike,
Hey, Sam. Yeah. So obviously, if you're not getting bombarded probably quite as much as we might have thought, that means one, construction's a very lucky industry potentially to start with, because every other industry that I've been in, you are getting harassed. But I'm interested in terms of like how often would you be actually engaging a supplier or a vendor from some kind of outreach approach? Can you kind of count them on your hand, or are there ones that are actually getting through and you go, yep, that's actually useful and I'm interested in doing something?
Yeah, so I was pretty bad. I'm probably brought a lot of bad karma on myself moving into this role, but I could say near 0 times that I would engage with sales that would come in. And so I should say like there's a lot of sales coming through outreach, but it's not in tech. In all other space in construction, there's plenty of reps coming to the door, coming to the project site to drop in. The drop-in's great. Pastries are welcomed. But my classic play was like they come and ask for me and they would get handballed straight to the graduate engineer every single day of the week. Like there's no way I was ever, unless I knew them, and I knew a couple of them, the side offers rock up, they're never getting to me. They're going to the grad engineer. Tickets
So
to the footy works pretty well though. That one gets you.
I was going to say, it sounds like it's either like a good referral recommendation or an elite level pastry or something like the footy. You got to get up above to get your attention.
The hot tip, the pastel donatas. There's one supplier there. They're legendary across Melbourne. So for all the suppliers out there, get into those pastel donatas.
Okay. Prepare to be bombarded. Do you I guess on the flip side, I guess as a contractor, when I was in the role in construction, I'd have this view of like all the salespeople that were like landing in my inbox, or the people coming and knocking at the door, getting handballed to the graduate engineer, that they were kind of like, let's say, like snaky, lizardy, slimy, very like transactional. Now that you've fully adopted the persona, how close do you think that is to reality, and what's been surprising for you in terms of what it actually looks like?
Yeah, like I said, I haven't brought myself a lot of good karma in my behavior towards sales reps over the years. I think that, there is that sort of, you have this idea of their persona. It's not really snaky, but there's always that undertone of, well, there's obviously a transaction here. And I can honestly say that sitting on the other side of it now, you're just happy to talk to someone. Like you're rocking up. You don't even care. You don't care about. You're like, I just want to have a conversation and see where you're at, because I might be able to help you. Yeah, and often you never get to that point. You as like on site as an engineer, you're like, I'm shutting everything out. Like when I need something, I'll go and get it. Whereas often there's probably been moments where I'll be spinning the wheels, or as a project we'll be spinning our wheels on something that someone outside of the org could probably help us with, but we're just not open to that transaction because we put those blocks up and we've been doing it for 12 years.
I think one of the things that was eye-opening to me to understand is that like the way most things, like if you're being sold something from different vendors or software vendors or technology vendors, the way a lot of it is, let's say, like priced, that company isn't like becoming worth $1 billion from making one sale to one project for, you know, a year or whatever. So the incentive structure is for, well, especially for a lot of software as a service, there's no great incentive for anyone to be like a lizard or snake or a slimy person to try and quickly transactionally sell a thing to a project. The incentive is to build a relationship that adds value and over time compounds and compounds and compounds. Because yeah, you're, well, as you would see on your side, there's no great amazing trick to, like, you know, if you can trick one project into buying some software,
Yeah.
if it doesn't deliver real value for them, there's no second project, there's no, when those people move to the next project, there's none of that
Yeah.
building of long-term relationship.
Yeah. To be honest, like when I think about the traditional sales in construction, like, because we're talking about tech, but like tech is such a small percentage of what actually hits the project teams. Engineers are actually really bad buyers because we've been ingrained to just not price down and like go through this sort of procurement process where you go out and you have to get three prices and go through this swathe of interviews to these poor people just to buy, a few $1,000s worth of stuff off them. Whereas supervisors are probably great, on the other side are really good buyers. And they're the ones that you see traditionally set up these really good relationships with, plant suppliers, quarries, other material suppliers, and they're the ones that can see the value in these relationships because they're the ones who are making phone calls on a Friday trying to get two pieces of plant there on a Monday and leaning on like a favor or, promises of future work. So, I'd say engineers could take a lot out of page of, supervisors' playbooks as far as, relationships with people in sales.
Yeah, there's a whole interesting study into like the buying behaviors of like construction industry because of that procurement process. Like, we're so used to buying rebar contracts in a specific way or whatever it is that we kind of like buy everything in the same way.
Yeah.
And I can think of a ton of projects that like customers or companies that are customers of Aphex who project like decides to use or purchase our software. And then for the next 4 months, they go through the like, we're going to go and ask Monday.com for a quote. We're going to go and ask Oracle for a quote. And then we're going to do a little table of like the pros and the cons of these like different tools and then the costs. And then, it's like trying to like square peg round hole everything into like this is how we buy everything process.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny to watch. Like, we have like, as you know, we have like, we put our pricing on our website, and I know a bunch of companies or projects that will do that assessment process, then they'll come back and say second round offers of pricing, and then it'll go, a month will go past, best and final offer round.
Yeah, like, oh, the link's still to the website. Yeah,
the link is still to the website. Yeah, it's still there.
I mean, you're right. It's not a bad thing, but you pick which, what you're applying to. It's not it doesn't work for everything. It does work for a vast majority.
Yeah, like you said, what the technology is like such a tiny bit of what construction is actually buying, and it probably fits like the vast majority of it. So in terms of, I'd be interested to understand, like, from your previous experience on projects where those projects have adopted or trialed some software or technology, and whether it was you that like brought it in or a colleague that brought it in. Maybe like, just as a scene setter, have you ever had like let's say a bad experience on a project?
I've had a few. To be honest, most of the experiences have been bad. Not bad. It's just not perfect. I think it's one of these things where you're really looking to hit this like super high mark to bring on tech, and then it might be like 75 or 50% useful, and then at that point it's you can't. It's not a pass mark thing. It needs to work for the project, or it doesn't. So yeah, I've tried to bring on a few different techs in my time. That's sort of that's my kink a bit. I quite like to have a look what's out there. I worked for a company and they were doing some work with this piece of software, and I tried to bring it on. It was very powerful, did some really cool stuff that had some help. But one of the biggest problems I had was getting people to use it. Like, I was like, you had to get something set up, and at the end of the day, you need engineers were, you know, the people that it was meant for to make their lives easier, and they didn't use it. And it came down to their experience using it. It was a bit clunky. It was, you know, it gave them some value, but they also had to do a bit more work to get it, you know, that value out of it. And because it wasn't core to what they do day to day, you know, it was like, how do I lead these horses to the water? Yeah, I can see the value, but it really doesn't matter what I see. I can't sit there all day and whip, you know, 15, 20 engineers to use something because I think it's good. And I think that same idea is what the most deployment or most trials of software I've seen is where corporates trying to bring in software because they're usually the ones that are sort of strategizing at a higher level, or they've got a business use that they're trying to deploy. It's the same thing though, you know, they'll come out and they'll have this big push and they'll push it on the project manager. And at the end of the day, engineers aren't using it. You can only whip them for so long. And really you're relying on some sort of social structure within your company. The fact that someone from corporate is telling a PM who's telling an engineer to do it to make it happen. And if you're at that point, it never works. Just as time goes on, it dissipates out. People stop using it.
Yeah, that top-down approach definitely like has a high propensity to end in what we'd call shelfware, like stuff that people buy and it never gets used and sits on the shelf. Mike, do you have a question, mate?
Yeah, I really love this stuff, particularly when you're reflecting on what it looks like to actually get technology in that drives some value. And so often, if I think back to my experience deploying, whether it's a CRM or a marketing system or a bigger resource management system, so much of that value is unlocked, as you said, when people actually use it. It doesn't matter how good or how powerful it is if people aren't actually using it. And so, yeah, I was interested just to kind of double click on your experience with you can see the value of something. How did you go about trying to get the buy-in from the other people? Because there's always some inertia to get over before you actually unlock that value. And so, yeah, I was just keen to hear a bit more about how did you try and tackle that? I imagine after the first failure or two, you thought about trying to rethink it. What did you learn?
I probably didn't learn much out of it except that I was like the corporate, with my naive engineer mind that I'd just go, all right, you're all in my team here. I want to do this because I see the value for this project. So here it is. I present it to you, train you how to use it, and then go. And then you just sit back and you're like 2 weeks later, well, why aren't you using it? I told you to use it. And then, it's just tumbleweeds and yeah. And then you try and bring it in, and then when you start talking to people and they explain it, and then you actually sort of sit in their seat and you're like, using it, and you're like, okay, I can see like our incentives aren't aligned here. Like I want something out of it, but I'm asking you to do extra work for it. It doesn't make this is your role. You have responsibilities. It's not getting you a better outcome for your day to day. So, our incentives are different. But I didn't learn anything out of that, I think, until I've sort of sat on the other side here. I just thought, the tech shit, or, like it just didn't happen. And then I'll move on and crack on with the project.
Yeah, it's so true. It's a lot easier said than done. And I think, sometimes it takes plenty of those experiences before it actually starts. But you're basically just running a mini top-down exercise yourself. Like you've created your own 100%. Mini head office that's saying,
that's it.
This is the way we've decided to do things. Great news, guys.
Yeah, no, never works. Never works.
You've heard me say probably a bunch of times before, Sam, this idea of how like there's this conversation in the media around social media where it's saying that like the users of social media are not the customer, they're the product, because it's all about capturing the data and selling it off to people. And I've said a bunch of times internally and to people that I think like a lot of construction software is like in a similar boat. The software is designed with the end users, whether it be engineers or supervisors or whatever it is, as the product. They're part of the product, not the customer of the product. And the process of thinking about what's the behavioral change for them, what's the experience like for entering the information that we need to capture, do they get any value out of it, is all kind of secondary or not even thought about behind, we need to capture this data and I get a report. And whether that report's going to you as like a manager of a team or as a project director or as a corporate, those outputs and stuff they're great. Everyone wants those, but like when the rubber hits the road, someone needs to, because construction's a messy, non-digital industry. Like there's dirt being thrown around, there's stuff being
Yeah.
welded, there's concrete getting poured, and it's that's not throwing off a lot of like really structured data that can just go straight into a report. And so there's this layer on top that in order to turn that digital, someone's got to sit there and enter information. And so often the software jams that behavior to a supervisor or an engineer who are like the busiest people on the project, and assumes that they're going to like fundamentally change their behavior so that head office person gets a little chart. And it's like, that's just that's not reality.
I mean, it's like any new process that happens on a project inevitably goes to, I won't say every time, but let's say 90% of the time falls to the engineer. And it's not because we hate engineers, it's just that engineers and supervisors are at the center of what's happening in construction. So everyone else who may be able to put that information in as sort of a secondary step to the information, like where that data is coming from. So, the engineers at the coalface, if they get someone else for that data, they got to tell them about it or give them something anyway. So inevitably it falls to the engineer.
Yeah, totally. If you were knowing what you know now, and then sort of talking to a younger version of yourself that might have been trying to like do the mini top-down deployment of your team, where you just tell them, use this piece of software, it's great, I get a chart.
Yeah.
What would you do? Would you do anything differently?
I think corporate try to do this a bit more. They're probably a bit more experienced at it, where you're trialing things a bit more. I think probably arrogantly, I thought that I could, just go and find solutions to problems that I saw and then implement them. But it's a lot more complex than just this sort of nail and hammer thing where you've got a problem and then you find a tool to fix that problem. So I think if I was doing it again, you would probably try and roll it out over a longer period and trial it with the actual users and get feedback on it before you try and deploy it. And in that feedback, you're going to get a lot of information around what's good, what's bad, like, does this help your day? And I think those sorts of questions inherently are going to answer the question, well, are other people going to use it? Ultimately, it comes down to the value prop. Like, does this offer me value? Does this make my day easier? If it doesn't, let's move on and find something else.
So, Sam, something that you were talking about there, particularly where you're leading to with, I guess, that concept of trialing and maybe that kind of working a little bit better. If I reflect back to my experience, it feels like there's always this push and pull dynamic where I really want to get something out of it. I've got to take the team on a little bit of the journey though. And so have you had any, like, either driven them yourself or been a part of some of those trials where it is starting to help kind of unlock some of the little value to exchange for the ask that you're making? I'm just keen to hear if you've had any luck or experience in starting to kind of alleviate just some of that burden of whatever the extra time to change costs people.
Yeah. There was one, I wasn't launching it, but from corporate, it was like a site diary type application. They were doing it the right way, doing a couple of project trials and trying to launch that, and just to a select part of each project, just have sort of one engineering stream and supervisor stream looking at it and trialing it, providing feedback. So it was handled very well, but you sort of get to the point you could see some benefits, and it sort of comes back to my earlier point around this. It's either got to work like for 99% of the crew. If it's only works for 50, 75%, that's great. But you're at this decision where you've got this, like, through this site diary, did some great things, but you reach a point as a business, and this is the same info that came back from all these trials, is, as a company, do we reshape our process to fit in with this software, or is the software going to make the investment to reshape a process to fit with what we do? So, that's where you get to where you're quite happy with what it does, but you're fixed with the decision to either jump across and change what you do, but nine times out of 10, the businesses just aren't going to do that and make that leap for a new piece of software, and that's where it falls over.
It's Sam. It's super interesting because that like conundrum comes up a lot not so much in like what I've seen from our software, but I have seen in talking to customers when they're thinking about adopting technology, this idea that a certain piece of technology that might be used by some of their peers or lots of their peers or whatever requires a slightly different business process or process on the project to what they typically run. There's that trade-off of do we try and change our behavior to do the sort of thing that's like, let's say, more standardized, or do we stick with the way that we do it? Sometimes I've seen that lead to like contractors building their own version of that tool around their process, which sometimes can work. But then on the flip side, if that process that they have is like inherently inefficient, they essentially just encode the inefficiency in the software that they build and then lock
Yeah.
it in.
Yeah. And
So it's this, I don't envy the folks making these decisions at the contractors, because they're kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't. If they build it around what they currently do, they're kind of locking in the inefficiency. But if they
yeah.
try to change it, they've got this behavioral change problem.
And it's such a huge lock-in, because it's not a cheap investment to go build these things. Like, you're bringing in some serious people to build these complex database frameworks around what your business does, and you really, like, you nailed it. Like, you push yourself down this path, and maybe you never even had the conversation internally, are we really happy with this current process? Like, should we be tidying this up a bit before we go and build this framework around it?
Yeah, for sure. The other thing that you said before, which for those that are listening at home, we just took a 5-minute pause while I tried to remember a question I was going to ask. The thing that you mentioned was trialing different tools, and that prompted me to recall again lots of conversations I have with companies around how they've got all these different tools, and people on projects have the tool for X, the tool for Y. The bookmark bar is like 100 different apps. Was
Yeah.
the experience, everyone talks about how in construction they're like not connected in many, many ways. Was that the experience for you as you trialed and looked at different tools on a project? Were any of them connected to each other? Or was it very like siloed, download this, upload here?
Yeah, it was pretty much like there was some cross compatibility where there's a lot of like GIS mapping tools out there, for instance, and so really they're trying to pull the same information, but they're not. Neither software's been created to integrate with each other. It's just like hard downloading and uploading, like forcing it between two. I think the problem is that these software, they're trying to answer a specific value proposition. Like, they see a problem that they're trying to solve. They're just about trying to solve that. There's a lot of software out there now where these integrations you can do are pretty cool. Like, there's so much data flying around, and I think most businesses are now looking at this, like, all this data flying out, how are we capturing it in an efficient way? And that's probably the key, like, in an efficient way, because it's really no help to contractor who's got 10 different pieces of software with they do 10 different things that talk to each other 20% of the way. Like, you don't want to be copying that information across, because in the same way that anything that relies on a person to do an activity, that step's going to fall over somewhere along the way, and you're going to have the wrong information.
Yeah, and like the bar for us, for example, in Aphex to adopt technology is like, if it doesn't integrate with the other things that we use, it's like almost like not even an option for us. How strongly do you reckon that integration piece is weighted in the decision process in construction at the moment?
At a project level, I don't think we're really thinking about it. There's other things that's on their mind, but at a corporate level, I definitely I get the feeling that they're thinking down that path, because they're not just managing what happens on a job, they're managing a whole business. So how that integrates with either what they do or what they're planning to do is paramount.
Yeah, awesome.
Last question. Hopefully it's a good one. No pressure. The last bit that you mentioned, just in terms of that, obviously the difference between project based, and you've been on plenty of projects, and what the head office is trying to do at a contractor level. They're obviously looking to kind of start standardizing and integrating and kind of codifying best practice as they go. just your experience moving through a few different projects, some with the same contractor and some with a different one. Did you find that it was quite similar, the stack of kind of tools that we're using on each project? Or was it different and it kind of was solved almost bespoke each time on each project?
It's probably like the 80-20. Like there's probably most contractors using a similar set of tools, and then there's some fringe tools that they're trying to bring on, and you do see a few that come through and like companies adopt them company wide, but fairly similar sets. Yeah, I would say like the set of tools that I think the reason is that you think of every construction project, you've almost got to think of it as like its own mini business. Like it's a job that's going out. They get a set of rules that the company's given them as to how they operate back to sort of a central location. But all these projects, like a lot of them now are joint ventures. They have these different framework models, alliances. They create their own businesses. They're at different locations with different setups, different requirements. So there's different needs for the projects. So a lot of it does stem out of every time a project's set up, what do they specifically need? So the basic tools that, enterprise agreements, that corporate setup answer basic ones, but a lot of the time projects need to go out and answer the questions specific to where they're at and what they need to deliver that project.
Yeah, cool.
Mate, we are out of time, so thank you very much for taking the time. I just want to say, like, I think as I talk to projects around Oz, UK, and around other places, one of the biggest criticisms that I think I hear about technology vendors generally and their like sales reps is the vast majority of them are not from construction, inexperienced, very transactional, and kind of just trying to sell them something and make a commission. And I think your experience, as you've, I guess, demonstrated through this conversation as well, is like wildly different. And so, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us, and thanks for joining the team, mate.
No worries.
Thanks, Sam.
for
Good
having
to
me.
chat with you, mate.
Cheers.
Cheers.